Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Observer Research Foundation. My name is Abhijit Singh, and I'm a senior fellow here at the foundation, and I head the Maritime Policy Initiative. Before I introduce the topic for this event today and introduce our distinguished panel, I'd like to begin by thanking all of you for being here. You know, it's a scorching day outside, and you've all braved the heat, the sun, the traffic to be here. And that tells me something about the interest in the topic that we are discussing today, which is coastal security. Now, I'd say that coastal security as a topic for us, when we decided to go and do something on it, the logic was really that there has been a lot of interest in the domain of constabulary security and maritime policing. And that has to do with the fact that the Indian Navy has been very actively involved in, as you know, fighting the pirates in the Gulf of Aden. There's been a deployment in the Arabian Sea. The Navy has now joined the Combined Maritime Forces, the CMF. And also the Coast Guard has been very active. There's been some drug hauls recently off India's coast. But the question that we're really asking is that almost 16 years after the 26/11 incident, and a number of measures have been put into place, and I'm sure our panelists are going to talk about them. I'm not going to touch on each one of them, but in all of the measures that have happened, are we in a more secure state today? Are we better equipped to tackle the challenge of maritime terrorism? That's one. But also beyond maritime terrorism, are we looking at other threats, other emerging threats, in the non-traditional security domain? The fact that there's greater illegal fishing now, there's maritime pollution that happens, there's this illegal migration that happens. Drug trafficking has come up in a big way. Marine conservation is a theme that increasingly governments, including India's are getting interested in. So does the maritime security architecture or the coastal security architecture also take into consideration these issues? Has it really evolved to look at these? And lastly, the prompt for us to have this topic as this discussion was that increasingly we're finding that coastal security challenges intersect with strategic security challenges. For instance, if we find Chinese boats in the Indian Ocean region, some around India's periphery, some of these fishing boats are also mini intelligence gathering ships. And we do know that China does have survey ships and research vessels that are also in our waters. So we thought that it's going to be a good idea to discuss all of this. And this is, of course, part of the national security dialogues that we do every month. It's a monthly conversation that we have in which we discuss India's emerging security challenges. This time we're doing maritime, and in maritime we're doing coastal. I'll quickly introduce our distinguished panelists to you. On my right is Admiral Anil Chopra. He's a former CNC, the Commander-in-Chief of the Western Naval Command and the Eastern Naval Command. And he's also been Director General of the Coast Guard, presently with the Delhi Policy Group. There's Captain Parmar, Sarabjit Parmar, a former colleague of mine from the IDSA, a leading voice on maritime affairs, now with the USI. And Pushpita, one of the very prominent scholars whom I know, who's done a lot of field work on coastal security. Pushpita Das is from the Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. And I think the three of them are complete the sort of quorum because they all have different areas in which they specialize. But I'm going to start with the Admiral, and I'm going to ask you, sir, that the sort of prompt for you, the question for you would be that although there's much that has happened in the field of coastal security, what ails the architecture? What is it that is still not all right? And why are we still not in a place where we imagined we would have been 16 years after that incident happened in Mumbai?
A very good, hot afternoon to all of you. One of the reasons I accepted speaking here was actually to see the kind of interest and the kind of questions which come back to us 16 years after Bombay. I took over the Coast Guard 4 days after the Bombay attacks, and I was there for 3 years. And so for me, it was all very live at that point. And 16 years down the line, many seminars, many discussions have taken place. But as Abhijit hinted, in some places we are just standing still. Having said that, there has been considerable improvement in lots of areas with respect to coastal security. But this terminology, I've got a problem with the terminology to start with. When you talk about security and when you talk about preparedness, it takes on a military sort of, slant, as if there's going to be somebody attacking us, there's some tanks of planes or something going to come across, or some terrorists. A terror attack is a rare occurrence, and you cannot, in the first instance, you cannot structure coastal security around just terror attacks. Coastal security is an ongoing process which takes into account many things around the coast. And therefore, when we talk about, I don't think we should, refer to this as the state of preparedness. Preparedness is a term which is entirely military in its connotations, so maybe that's not the term to use. Even security, as you'll all agree, the term has become all-singing, all-dancing term, includes everything from food security to climate security. Maritime and coastal security is just one more security which has been added on to the lexicon. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to just take on 3 or 4 perspectives. One is coastal security should not be viewed through the prism of terrorism. Terrorism is from the sea can happen, but it's getting more and more difficult. The world has changed a lot from 2008 to now in terms of surveillance, electronics, drones, what have you. And of course, you can always carry out a terror attack, but it becomes increasingly difficult to do so given the organizational and material setup that is put into place. Was there coastal security before 2008? I'm sure there was. Or there was no, was the coast completely secure? No, in fact, if I just want to touch a spot of history, some of you will know, before the Coast Guard was set into place in 1979, there was only the Navy. And everything from smugglers to search and rescue to everything, the Navy was called upon to look at this. The Navy has big, expensive ships, destroyers, frigates, and the Navy kept telling the government that we can't do these sort of jobs. We need some sort of force which can address problems of crime, smuggling, pollution, search and rescue, a sort of law and order force. And the Coast Guard was conceived as a law enforcement agency to put into place to sort of enforce the laws of the country in its maritime zones. And it was viewed as that. What happened after 2008 is because the terrorist attack was like an enemy attack, it became the whole perspective changed, and we've started looking upon the Coast Guard and coastal security as some sort of military operation in which Pakistan or China or somebody comes and attacks us. So that is not the way to look at it, in my opinion. There is still a lot of crime. There's a lot of gun running and drug running and, narcotics, humans, all sorts of people who need to be checked. And it requires enforcement of the law. There's poaching in our waters. There's issues of marine safety, pollution, rescue, climate change. And people would say, which is more? Is the coast, the security of the coast, is it more threatened by environmental degradation or by terrorists on a daily basis? So if you think about it, that the coast and its waters around the coast are subject to crime, climate, environment, poaching, daily ways. And that is what you have to address. And if you address that, then automatically you are prepared to see the kind of developments which may take place if there were to be another terror attack. But if you start looking at the whole thing from a terrorist or terror point of view, you're going to do nothing much more than to become a sort of, some military lens that you put on. So there is a threat to the coast, but the threat to the coast is not from terror. There's a threat to the coast today, to any coast. About 15 years ago, we also came across increasingly land attack from the sea. Ships and submarines can attack the coast from 800 miles away in waters which are completely, the high seas, neutral waters. The Indian peninsula is threatened by these sort of possibilities, not just terror. And today, our coast, why is it so important besides the fact that the commercial city and the ports are there? It's because the nuclear, the space, the defense, naval bases, etc., are all on the coast. So therefore, they're all vulnerable. We have a term for this called VAs and VPs, vulnerable areas and vulnerable points along the coast. And these are subject to a threat from many, many possible places, including drones. As you have seen in the Ukraine war, you can just have a drone launched from a ship out 100 miles from Bombay, and if you're not okay with it, it can pose a threat to you. A terror attack, a military attack, any sort of attack. So the subject is complex. That's all I wanted to say, as far as the complexity and this terror bit. But Abhijit here asked me to talk about capacity and capability, two difficult terms to understand. In India, somehow, capacity means more people, more boats, more ships, more stations. That is fooling ourselves. That is delusional. You don't get security by more ships and more boats only. Of course, it matters, but capacity is not built only by platforms and hardware. Because of this business of more boats, you have more organizations, more forces, multiple agencies, everyone buying boats, everyone buying all sorts of things and confusing the scenario. So it bothers me that 16 years after 2008, we still haven't been able to resolve multi-agency issues. Unless there is clear-cut responsibility and accountability, and with that requisite authority to whoever is responsible and accountable, we're not going to get this act together. There will always be blame games, like the fire in Delhi school, hospital, was it? Everybody now blaming everybody else, doctors, hospital, fire department. It happens everywhere in the world. But you don't get security when there are too many people with different organizations hanging around. You need clear-cut, lines of control, command and control. And in my view, we took 2008 and we have used it to build up what we think is capacity, boats with the police which do not function, personnel who are not trained. So I think it's no secret. It's been commented upon, there's commentary in the papers. But we carry on. And so it's our job to keep underlining, highlighting that capacity and capability is not just having more ships and more boats and more people. So, moment you have the kind of situation you have today, there is diluted command and control. There are tough battles. There's a lot of hype, duplication, waste. The police, the Coast Guard, even the Navy is sometimes doing the same thing. Each not clear about clear-cut lines of responsibility and authority. So clearly for me, that is from where I've seen it from South Block and then as CNC in the field. The requirement is, this is the requirement which we have talked about for 10 years and we don't seem to have gone very much further. Now the Coast Guard. There's a small story here. In 1964, there were two boys who went sailing from Bombay Harbour, at that time Bombay. And it was pre-monsoon and they got stuck in a storm. And they managed to send a SOS on their little radio. And that came to the Navy finally, and the Navy was asked to sail a ship to rescue these boys. The Navy had some cruisers, destroyers, big ships alongside at 6 hours' notice. Long story short, the boys could not be rescued and they died. And there was a note from the naval chief at that time to the government, feeling very upset about this, and saying that we've been asking you that we need an auxiliary sort of force which can do all this and do it fast. But there was no response from the government. The Navy had been asking for the Coast Guard for almost 20 years. And then after 72, after the 71 war, there was more understanding, and finally the Coast Guard was set up in 79. Because the Navy is just not structured in its force mix to be able to do many of the jobs that the Coast Guard now has to do. Search and rescue, pollution control, environmental looking after, poaching, gun running, crime, human trafficking, explosive trafficking, contraband, all sorts of things which require a constabulary law enforcement force. And somehow, in this 2008 terrorist attack, we have forgotten all this, and we are asking ourselves today the state of India's coastal security preparedness. For what? What are you preparing for? For a terrorist attack? That's not what you should be preparing for. That happens automatically. I've reached an age where I'm politically incorrect, so I can say a few things which may not be said. The state police, marine police, is a non-starter. And the police it's not their fault. Their entire ethos, they're meant for fighting crime on land. Now you've decided to take out some of them, recruit some people, make them into sailors and tell them to do patrolling. They just can't do it. Their boats are not maintained. It takes 5-6 years for people to get a feel of the sea. And all what the state police has been charged with can easily be done by the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard can do entirely what we are doing instead of looking at this as a separate force, separate organization. But the state police has one very important role, which I saw in America, in Europe, in South America, and that is the marine police there actually patrols on land. If you go to California, the state marine police is going up and down the coast on land. Because if there's a terrorist or a smuggler, he has to eventually land, isn't it? So there's no point sending the police to start patrolling within the waters. It doesn't make sense. So I have always said that we don't need state marine police. The harbors and the ports can be looked either by the Ports and Harbor Authority, or the state police can do patrolling within the harbors. But outside of it, there is no need to do anything by the police. These are just thoughts. We can have a discussion if some of you have a story. And then there's this business of patrolling. Am I okay for time?
Yes,
2 minutes. Okay. You know, everyone thinks that you do patrolling, it will help. You do better surveillance, better MDA, better. I once went to Key West in Florida, where there's a hell of a lot of smuggling of narcotics from South America. There are 17 agencies in a unified command in Key West. And when I was given a briefing, I found there were 6 boats and some 11 aircraft totally. So I said, how do you patrol? How do you patrol with this limited? He said, we don't patrol. So I said, what do we do? He says, we wait for intelligence, and based on intelligence, we send out a ship or a helicopter or a boat. He says, we are not so rich as we can keep flying around and keep patrolling. And in India, for some reason, we have decided that patrolling, the more ships that are burning petrol on the sea and more aircraft which are flying around, that gives us better security. It does not. Today, you just need drones and some of the more important technologies, and you can do the same thing. So, you know, this business of just patrolling, ships, boats, police, Coast Guard, Navy, it's all becoming a little cluttered. Yes. If I have managed to convey what I wanted to, I think that is good enough. I will just, is there anything more I want to say? Yeah, okay, I think I'll stop there.
So that was a terrific overview. I'd just like to say, the use of the word preparedness and the reason we sort of got that word in, it would have been enough for us to say India's coastal security. What's happened in the past 2 or 3 years, there have been some select incidents wherein there have been incursions in India's waters. There was an incident last year, I forget the month, but I think October or November, wherein a fishing boat was found abandoned off the coast of Raigad, I think, around Maharashtra. It had AK-47s in it. That investigation is still on. Now, that tells you that, nothing happened, but something could have happened. Again, this year, I think it was in April, there was a boat which came in all the way from Oman or someplace, and it was found floating off Prongs Reef in Mumbai. And there were 2 apparently Indian people from South India. They had escaped from whichever country they had started out from. So incursions are happening, and some of them are, of course, inadvertent. No one chanced upon them. Finally, the Marine Police caught up with them. And so we asked the question, preparedness. But I think the Admiral makes a very good point that if you look at security only from the lens of terrorism, you will come to one set of conclusions. And if you have a more comprehensive view of it, you will have a sort of a more broader understanding of what needs to be done in terms of combating all the threats in a very comprehensive omnibus way. But I'd like to sort of ask you one question, so before I go to Pushpita, which is that in a study that happened in 2017, 2018, and ORF was also sort of part of it, one of the things we found that, and this came from the Coast Guard officers, which is that they said that although the Marine Police does not see itself as an integral part of the maritime security architecture. It is, but it does not sort of play that great a role in it. But we can't do without the Marine Police, because a lot of the intelligence actually comes from the state, these state authorities, because they are plugged into these coastal communities. They gather a lot of information from them. They have very good terms with them. So they are more comfortable. They speak the language. So, coastal community leaders are very comfortable speaking with the police, giving them that intelligence. And a lot of coastal security actually doesn't depend on capacity and capability. It depends on intelligence and human intelligence. Now, one of the problems that could have been, this is just sort of question to you, and this is what the study found, was that our focus is more on technical intelligence. But perhaps the human intelligence part is somehow being neglected. So given this reality, sir, would you still think that, sort of putting the coastal police out of the architecture would not be such a good idea?
I think you've answered your own question. Police always gives intelligence, and they don't have to be Marine Police to give you intelligence about coastal areas. The normal police in all coastal states has sufficient intelligence about coastal affairs. So the Marine Police or police can start patrolling the coast, can provide intelligence. I'm only saying that you don't have to spend time, money to try to train them to take boats out to sea or to maintain boats. All that is not the job of the police. It's a bit, and I hope when they coordinate, this point will be taken into. But you said one more thing, which I'd like to comment before you hand over. We talk about incursions or the odd chap getting in. There's no country in the world whose coast is completely a barrier. It's not a land border where there is a wire mesh and there is, people can't enter. The seas are porous and no one requires permission to go to sea. If you want to take off in an aircraft, even if you're flying a Cessna, you have to file a flight plan, you have to take permission to take off. But you can cut a tree, make a hole in it, and go out to sea from any part of the coast. You don't have to take anybody's permission, or no one can stop you. So we find in all the various, highly advanced technology cannot stop the odd guy from coming in, the odd couple who are out, just going out for a, joyride. Everybody is allowed to go to sea, and that's part of the issue.
Thank you, sir. Pushpita.
Thank you, and good afternoon to you all. As far as the deficiencies are concerned, most of them have been listed. But I would like to draw attention to the very fact that the major actor as far as coastal security is concerned are the state governments. Now, in my field trips, I have seen that all the state governments and the union territories are not on the same page as far as coastal security is concerned. Even Maharashtra, which has seen so many terror attacks, I have seen that their state leadership, their attitude is very lackadaisical as far as coastal security is concerned. And many states also say that, we haven't experienced terrorism, no bomb blast has happened in our state. So why should we spend so much of money in implementing the coastal security scheme? Now, this kind of an attitude is actually, it percolates down to the ground level. So when we look at the marine police, when we look at the civil administration, which includes the fisheries department also, they do not give too much of prominence to coastal security, but it has changed over the years. Like, I have been doing coastal security since, let's say, 2008. September is the first time I'd gone to Gujarat to look at the state of coastal security preparedness there. And I was quite taken aback, rather shocked to see that, the patrolling of the coastal waters were done by a boat which was seized, a Pakistani boat which was seized because the Coast Guard and of course, that time Marine Police was not there, didn't have a boat to patrol the shallow waters. And then I went to Mumbai after the Mumbai terror attack happened. So I had gone to in March 2009, and I asked about Operation Swan. It was in place at that point of time, which was basically a joint patrolling conducted by the state police, the Coast Guard. In the case of Maharashtra, it was the Navy and the Customs. Now, I said, so when I went, I said, what happens to that joint patrolling? Then they said, no, it is okay. We keep on doing this patrolling. And also I went to the villager, the coastal villager, and he says, oh, we know the timing. It starts at 8 o'clock, it goes all the way there, and after 4 hours, it comes back. So I said, if everybody knows when the patrolling starts, when it ends, then what is the point of having this patrolling? Because it is supposed to be a surprise patrol. So the policeman said that it is very difficult to have a coordination between all police, the customs, and the Navy. Because, all of them, they say timing doesn't suit us, the personnel is not there. And most interestingly, these are human behaviors I'm talking about, and these have a very profound impact on how we see the plans are being implemented. So when the boat, now if there is a custom inspector, he says that I'm going to command the boat and you have to follow my rules, right? Whatever command I gave, whatever orders I gave, you have to follow. So there is lots of friction amongst these organizations also. You talk about turf war and all. Now, Coast Guard is the lead intelligence agency as far as coastal security is concerned, and they have monthly meetings. Now, the people say that these are more of intelligence seeking exercise rather than sharing exercise, because there is no intelligence sharing happening in these LIA meetings. Now, my contention is that, this is not supposed to be sharing, because the system, the structure is such that you cannot share intelligence over the table, across the table, sorry. Because intelligence which is gathered, the person, it sends up to his boss. And the boss, if he thinks that it has to be shared, then he shares with the boss of another organization, and then it percolates down to the person, the nodal officer, right? So you cannot have across the table sharing of intelligence. So this criticism that, intelligence is not shared amongst the organizations because of, they want to score some brownie point, doesn't hold much water. Anyways, so the attitude of the state government is a problem. That's why what they do is that they do not give the money. So if you don't give the money to the coastal security scheme, so we do not have, the policeman cannot be recruited. Fuel, which is required to run the boats, you won't have them. You don't have money to repair the boats. So all of these, makes it extremely difficult because it is at the cutting edge that we have this problem. Another problem is the rising discontentment amongst the fishermen. Now, as you know that after 1993 serial bomb blast, the government of India said that the fishermen should be co-opted in the coastal security and they should be asked to be ears and eyes for the security agencies. Now, this was institutionalized after Mumbai attack happened, in which, fishermen were grouped as Sagar Rakshak Dal, in which they were given some rudimentary training and their services were used during various coastal security exercises. And they were asked to, act as ears and eyes for the Navy, Coast Guard, and Marine Police. Similarly, the coastal villagers were grouped as Gram Rakshak Dal, and they were incentivized in some rich coastal states. They were even given mobile phones, etc., to report any kind of suspected activities to the Marine Police and all. But today the fishermen are extremely discontent because they think that their access to the traditional harbors are no longer there. Because of these coastal security schemes and because of the a thrust to development of blue water economy and all these things, we see a series of establishment of a series of Coast Guard station, police station, naval station, ports, etc. And because these are restricted areas, the fishermen can't go into these harbors, which were their traditional harbors. Because I came across a case in Karnataka in which during the time of monsoon, there was a boat which was trying to approach the Mangalore port. But the police did not allow them to come to the boat, and the boat capsized and 6 fishermen died. And there were lots of anger amongst the fishermen saying that, you people, the government is trying to protect the country not from the terrorists but from the fishermen, because they say that we have to get a biometric card, we have to carry this, we have to color code our boat, as in paint our boat in different colors so that they can be identified by the Navy, Coast Guard, and police in the high seas. We have to install transponders, we have to do so many things, and these are not economically viable for them. And of course, we do have the issue of high-handedness of the Navy, Coast Guard. They don't prefer, especially in the southern states, they say that, communication is a major problem. Language is a major problem. The Navy and the Coast Guard only speak in Hindi, but they don't understand. So communication is an issue. And another thing is that Government of India also started, the helpline 1093 as far as police is concerned and 1554 as far as Coast Guard is concerned. And their often complaint was that this fishermen never contact us. So I asked the fishermen, why don't you contact them? So what the fishermen do is that they go to the sea, there is no mobile. As they approach the land, the mobile connection is there. So what they do is in the time of distress, they first call their owner of the ship, owner of the trolley. And the owner then talks to the fisheries department official, because they are in contact with each other. And then finally they might call the police or the Coast Guard. So these are issues. So over the years, even the Coast Guard people and the Navy people say that the quality and the quantity of intelligence or information coming from the fishermen is really bad. Then there are other issues also. Maybe you can talk about.
No, but Pushpita, before I go to Captain Parmar, I have one question to ask you. There is a sense among some of us that, from what appears in the media reports, is that some states appear to be more proactive and more responsive to the challenges. For example, Tamil Nadu always comes up. Even this pilot project of the AIS, etc., has happened in Tamil Nadu. Even fisheries regulation, whether it's biometric data, color codings, etc. Tamil Nadu is always in the news. Also Karnataka, but Maharashtra is always in the news for opposite reasons or wrong reasons. And then there's Orissa and all of that. So this claim that the states are not very responsive is not an across the board phenomena. It's variable. And what do you think is the reason behind it? Why is it that some states tend to play a bigger role? Are they more aware? They have greater sense of responsibility, or is it just that the overlap in responsibility? Some states don't take too well to it, and other states do.
So, in my opinion, when I visited other states also, like Tamil Nadu, we have a reason because they have been facing LTT problem for a long time. But then contrast this with Maharashtra, which has been facing so many, which has faced so many bomb blasts and all. But there is, it all personality driven exercise, I believe, because when I went to Karnataka, I met the leader of Marine Police, whatever it's called, ADGP or something, the additional director general. He seemed to be so enthusiastic about coastal marine police, and he also earmarked a place for this national academy for coastal policing has come up in Dwarka, but Udupi was he really pushed for that. He said that we should have academy here in Karnataka. Similarly, in Andhra Pradesh, I have also seen that the IG who was in charge of coastal security, he was very, enthusiastic and very proactive. But when I went to West Bengal, during that time, the IG was complaining that he has got such a small room and he can't perform, and he barely went to the field. So it's the different kind of personalities also make much of a difference.
Captain Pramar. So.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Abhijit, thank you for this opportunity. And I'm going to leave the slide on through the tenure of my talk, time of my talk, for the simple reason that this will give you an idea of the number of agencies involved. And this is a diagram we had made in 2015 when we were revising the Indian Navy's maritime security document, and we put a lot of effort in it. So the background, a lot of issues have been discussed. Background, you have center state issues, multiple, one. There are a number of ministries which you can see that have been mentioned there. And then, of course, you have the other agencies which are involved. Now, coming to think of it and the complexity of coastal security, and as Admiral Chopra mentioned, if we look only at terrorism, then, of course, we are looking only down one avenue. So, but in any case, this strategy of coastal security and defense in the unclassified maritime security document was written keeping in mind the mandate given to the Indian Navy, which was focused on coastal security, flowing from 2611. But now when you look at the complexity of this, click please. Now sitting back, since I was party to the revision and one of the main culprits, and all errors are mine in any case in the book, we realized we missed out MEA. Because now when you look at UNCLOS, and there is a fine dividing line that anything seaward of the baseline is MEA and UNCLOS, anything landward of the baseline is MHA. A lot of issues like UNCLOS issues, that all maritime complex issues in the world come from drawing of baselines. The division of labor within the country also comes from the baseline itself. So there are issues to be looked at internally, and there are issues to be looked at externally. So I'm just going to press on and flag some major issues. So let me take you back to the US, when you have upheavals and ripples. So after 9/11, when Homeland Security was established, you can imagine the major upheavals and ripples when 13 independent agencies were put under one office. And I have had discussions with people, and there was outrage. That how am I expected to stop reporting to X person or the highest office in the government and then route through somebody. When we looked at the coastal security apparatus, so when it was set up, there were minor upheavals and ripples. And some of them still exist. And these are the gray areas, a lot of them covered by Admiral Chopra and Pushpita. And so we must keep that in mind. There is no system that will work 100% smoothly, but the issue is that we need to continue at it. And so therefore, I always often make the statement that coastal security in India is still an evolving phenomenon. It's very clear that instability on land will always have an impact on the maritime domain. And that ripple effect of that instability, if it is permitted to permeate outwards, will impact the neighboring land areas. To give you the example of the Houthi actions and the resurgence of piracy. We've suffered piracy before. Any easterly drift of any of this is going to impact India, and in many ways will also impact our coastal security, making the muddy waters even muddier. Terrorism is a big issue. 2611 is a stark reminder, but add to that drug and human smuggling. There are other maritime crimes also. Humans, arms, even the smuggling of rare and exotic animals and plants, which is an ecosystem unto itself. So these are all maritime crimes. So we get back to the crux as who's going to look after what, defense or security, and we will I'll handle that a little later. So therefore, at the broader level, when you look at it, you need to look at coordination at the international and domestic levels. To give you an example, drug hauls. Recently, in the last 3-4 months, the Royal Navy and the Indian Navy have had huge drug hauls while operating under CMF-CTF. You may think that it's in the North Arabian Sea, or it's in the Gulf, or it's in the Red Sea, but these drug hauls, if not stopped, would have had an impact on India and the region itself. So there is a requirement to operate at the international level and also to limit the spread of non-traditional threats that thrive on instability. Having said that, if they do come in our side, or if we do manage to stop them, you can imagine the less of the workload that comes on the various agencies and the coordination required between at the international level and the domestic level. So if you do not have a smooth domestic level setup, it has a repercussion when you work at the international level. At the domestic level, a lot of things have been done, and I'll just mention the establishment of the Office of the National Maritime Security Coordinator. Huge mandate. If you look at this diagram once again, if I really pity the NMSC, when he has to actually look at many of these or coordinate and work with many of these, almost all or most of them, again, who are independent agencies unto themselves. And therefore the chain of command, or if there's a coordination issue, there is still miles to go. But there are certain actions in hand, and I'm grateful to Admiral Prasanna for updating me on many issues out here. So there is 3 levels. Each has got a multi-agency maritime security group. This is still work in progress. As I said, we are still evolving. You have to see how far we go. At the coastal states and union territory level, there are state maritime security coordinators, which are again through the police, and the rules of business for all this is being drafted. So this needs to be established, exercised, worked out. Certain other aspects that are looked at are the NMDA project, which I believe has been sanctioned. The idea is to give a common operational picture where everybody gets plugged in. Now, smaller fishing boats are also an issue. If you do remember when we looked at the AIS, and there was an issue about fitment of transponders on sub-20-meter boats. And then, of course, the issue of who will fund this. The state says we don't have money. The center was also looking around that point in time. But I think there is some action in hand to ensure that transponders are fitted, at whose cost information will come later, which will give you a more effective MDA picture, especially along your coast, which will help not only in identifying boats that are suspected to be engaged in maritime crime, but will also make the existing MDA picture more complex. Analysis, time, manpower. All these issues will again be raising their head. As far as fisheries are concerned, I think there's going to be development of a common fisheries app. There's a look at a single ID for fishermen. There will be SOPs for harbors and landing centers. The last count when we wrote the maritime security document, we identified around 3,500 landing centers. So you can imagine these are under state. SOPs would have to be developed, fit in. Then, of course, there needs to be a common communication grid between the Navy, the Coast Guard, the Marine Police, who would be at the forefront of addressing these challenges. The MZI Act of 1976 looked at maritime zones for India, and the internal waters do not form any maritime zone, but it's a given. But when you look at the responsibilities given to, and I'm going to be very specific with the Coast Guard and the Coast Guard responsibilities on the maritime zone, if your internal waters are not classified as a maritime zone, then this is a gray area. Who will look after it? And as I said, it's from the baseline landward. The beauty of this is that, before I come to that, let's look at the demarcation between security and defense, which is an issue unto itself. So in the Maritime Security Strategy document of 2015, we attempted to define, and it's given in the glossary of terms, the difference between defense and security. Defense was clearly protection of sovereignty. And the main elements for that are the armed forces. Whereas security looked at enforcement of national laws, which is a policing issue. Policing is a state subject. And therefore, there is certain divergences between the methodology of policing as a state subject and the role that the central forces play. And this needs to be sorted out. There's still a lot of gray areas there. I totally agree with Admiral Chopra that you should take action under intelligence inputs. You cannot have a continuous patrol out there. There is wear and tear. There is no nation in the world who has that capacity capability. Just to give you an example of numbers, the Op Atlanta commander in 2011, after he had relinquished his command, he was a Marine officer, General Buster House, in a statement before the House of Lords Foreign Affairs Committee, when he was asked about numbers, he says in the area of responsibility of 2011 given to Op Atlanta, he says, if you want an equivalent of a 30-minute response to an SOS call from a merchant ship under a piracy attack, then I need 83 frigate-sized ships, each with an armed helicopter. There is no nation or navy in the world who can give you those figures. And if you look at our coastline, if you look at our maritime zones, the numbers just simply get multiplied so many times. So there is an issue, though there has to be actions under intelligence inputs. There is a difference in analyzing inputs for traditional and non-traditional threats, starting from the source to the output. There will be some overlap, so therefore the sharing of relevant information is important. How do you drive that dividing line? So that you don't make the existing information that comes in complex. To give you an example again, the IFC IOR in Gurugram, since January, after the attacks and the Houthi actions and piracy attacks, has been receiving at an average 2,000 emails per day. If you look at the UK MTO office also, the same number. They have that number of people. So the more the inputs, the more is the processing time, and therefore your outputs will be delayed, and then your actions will be delayed. So these are issues that need to be complected, onwards. Getting back to landward of territorial waters, national laws apply. So therefore it is sovereign territory in a way, as per UNCLOS. Therefore there's a mix of defense and security issues that come in the territorial waters. There is often an overlap, and when you step across the baseline into internal waters where sovereignty is once again supreme, there is more a case of law enforcement or maintaining law and order, whatever term you'd like to choose. Therefore, the issues of powers of arrest come in. Coast Guard officers have some powers of arrest, but not all. And we now have a sort of a rehaul of the judicial system, especially with respect to piracy, with the act of piracy. There are more courts involved, there are more police stations and all. Otherwise, there was that yellow police station in Mumbai who used to log all offenses of piracy at one point in time. But there is a way of improving. The same should also be done to maritime crimes cases. There was a debate at one time whether powers of arrest should be given to iron officers. I'm not too sure if it is still there. Admiral Chopra has headed the Coast Guard, so that issue would have crossed his desk a number of times. And I think there was a decision taken that not to give powers of arrest to iron officers because their main occupation is to defend the nation, not get into maritime crime. So there is some issues. Now this has to be decided between the police and the Coast Guard. How do you do it? And therefore, if you have a clearer SOP or a line of conduct or how to go about it, then of course there will be, I think, more effective prosecutions is the one way I can do it. So therefore, this demarcation has to be done at some level, perhaps at the GOC level, the Joint Operations Center level, by the relevant authority who is to be identified. And of course, the willy-nilly, the bottom line is that there has to be a rationalization of coastal security responsibilities. Perhaps more weight needs to be taken by the Coast Guard and Marine Police, or whatever force is decided to look into it. More importantly, technology. State issues were there. Even Gujarat Police uses, technology to a greater extent. Even the West Bengal Police, especially where drones are concerned, in areas near Sir Creek and also in the mangrove areas of West Bengal, which is closer to the border with Bangladesh, because you cannot physically have people. Technology is changing very fast. We need to have systems in line where in-date technology is procured, made available, may be operated under different areas of responsibility, different forces, but commonality of equipment would enhance logistics, make it better. And then, of course, we have the manned-unmanned teaming as concept coming out, which I think is very good insofar as coastal security is concerned, but it needs more interagency coordination. And as Admiral Chopra mentioned, well, if you have boats but they don't run, we can't afford to invest money in high-end technology and ensure that they don't work. Last point is the need to integrate civil society. And I'll give you one example before I stop. I was Commander Air of the Naval Air Station in Mumbai. And we had a helicopter flying in from Goa. It was monsoons, bad weather. Weather packed up. The helicopter had to make what we call a precautionary landing. At some area, it was a little hilly area. And within 5 minutes, there was a police jeep next to the naval helicopter. So when the pilot asked the inspector who came up with a full armed team, he says, the village at the bottom of the hill told us. And this was because of the interactions after 26/11 where civil society got integrated. As Pushpita said, there has to be incentives. And civil society is the people on ground who will be able to tell you, strange boat, stranger, not recognized. This is the basis from where inputs will come. I'll pause here, Abhijit.
Some very good points, sir. I mean, I would agree with you that integrating civil society is really the key to having a robust response to some of the challenges that we see. But I'm going to make one more point before I open this up for discussion, and perhaps I'll frame it as a question to Captain Parmar. So a couple of years back when I got to Indonesia, and we were having this discussion on littoral security, some issues of coastal security came up. And something very interesting that the Indonesian colleague told us. He said, what we follow is a common minimums approach. And his view was that what happens in coastal security often, and not just in Indonesia, but in many other countries, I suppose his reference was to India also, is that there are diverse perspectives of how the problem of coastal security should be tackled. The Navy thinks one thing. They have the Bakamla, which is their Coast Guard. The Coast Guard thinks another. Marine police stations have a different way of tackling security. And he said the disagreements are always going to be there. But what you do is that you look for common ground, and you have flexibility in the way that you tackle your problems. Now, this leads me to the question, which is that the problem, as we see in our coastal security architecture, is not so much coordination, because I think we do coordinate, as Pushpita rightly brought out. We do share intelligence, we coordinate. Our major problem, I think, is overlapping responsibilities, and especially when it comes to the state center. So, for instance, there was this proposal a couple of years back, I think it was 2019, to have a central marine police force, which obviously, as a former naval officer, I would think that perhaps it doesn't work. But the reason for the state government that doesn't work is the state government actually does not want you to take over legally the policing function. That should still be with them. Practically, you can go and do the policing. They're not interested in policing so much because that's not but don't take away the right to be able to investigate, charge people. All of that will still be. Now, that's a paradox. You can't get over that. Whatever technical, assistance you have, whether you have satellites, you have AICs, this and that, if you don't sort out the overlap in responsibilities, that continues to be a problem. So would you have some sort of, out-of-the-box ideas about how do you tackle this problem of overlap? How do you get them more interested in the idea of, coastal security?
When you have overlaps, either you're going to have a huge conflict of agencies working, or it becomes no man's land, that nobody is willing to take responsibility or accountability for that. So therefore, if you have to have something, then it has to be written. The best bet would be a legislation that clears all these. Because once you have a legislation going from the center and ensure the states follow it, or you have an overpowering central legislation that comes in through the parliament saying these are the responsibility of states, then states cannot run away from the responsibility to have their own state legislation that pushes these agendas. But this needs to be laid down very, very clearly. It's going to take time because such legislations cannot be pushed out in a hurry.
Right, legislation, and that brings to the point that this coastal security bill, I believe, has been hanging fire for many, many years now, since 2013, I think. And I suppose this is one of the reasons why we have not been able to make much headway. And I think this is also one of the reasons why in a lot of the other bills, even the merchant ship bill, the ports bill, etc., there is this conflict between center-state, which always sort of, what was that? Inland waters also. But with this, I'm going to open the house for questions and comments. Please keep your comments short, and I'd be happy if you can ask direct questions. Yes, sir.
Hello, good afternoon. I am B.K. Mitra. I had an opportunity to work in Andaman Nicobar Police in 70s, and I was also looking after the boat section, police boat. At that time, it is called as a police coast guard, because the coast guard unit was not there. And Admiral Anil sir, I tell you a small story. We were going to Narkundam Island, you know the Narkundam Island, and a big ship called Subhash. We were just going, Tarmungli. We were going there, and another poacher ship, it was a Taiwanese or I think the Burmese ship. They were going. We saw them, they are unauthorizedly doing the poaching work. So we just targeted our rifles which we were having, not at that time. But they were not afraid, because they were also having the guns. We both were at each other. We knew the range is not to reach up to that. We can't do anything because we were not having at that time the technology. But now the technology has improved. And what I feel with that overall scenario, because technology has come, different agencies has come. What Dr. Das has said, she said that coordination, yes, between different agencies are required. But until unless these coordination can come only when it is a clearly defined responsibility. What Captain Sarabjit has said, that it is very much required that different responsibilities for each organization has to be put. This is a small comment, sir.
Right. So this discussion has actually been really about coastal, meaning really close to the shoreline. But, this is also a continuum in a sense, because, now coastal security morphs into littoral security. And I mean, if you look at the fact that something that I mentioned in my initial remarks, the Chinese presence in our waters around, the survey ships, etc. Parmar sir, what's your sense of the international dimension of coastal security? Meaning, should we have a way in which we can provide a deterrent to foreign vessels in our waters, be they fishing boats or survey ships and research vessels, etc. Is there a way to tackle this problem?
First of all, then we'll have to back away from freedom of navigation if we're going to go down that road, which is not advisable at all. But what can be done is we do have an MZI Act on Fisheries 1981, which is very clearly laid down, and therefore that's already in action. But let me get back to what you said initially, is international sharing. So the fusion centers, the interconnectivity is, I think that the present situation in the Red Sea has actually opened the doors to the efficacy in which intelligence inputs or information inputs, we like to call it, and action subsequently. So let me give you an example of how it works and how you can possibly translate it towards coastal security also. Of course, there is IMAC and there is IFC IOR. There are international liaison officers in IFC IOR who are not part of IMAC, but IFC IOR can provide inputs to IMAC for the internal. So let me get back to the IFC IOR part. You'll remember that there was a Sri Lankan dhow that was attacked by pirates. One of the first attacks that took place, all right? So in a coordinated sort of fashion, we had an international liaison officer from Sri Lanka in Gurgaon. We had one from Seychelles. Input came from Sri Lanka through the ILO into the IFC IOR. We got from RCOC Seychelles. There was a combined effort put out, and finally the Seychelles Maritime Force went in, addressed the issue. In a similar fashion, if we get the issues of the inputs coming in, and then of course it would depend upon if you have a white shipping agreement, I don't remember the full details of it, so I'm open to correction out here, whether it covers fisheries also, or any other issues or any other suspect boats out of this. Give you another example, and I mean, this is how we can make use of these organizations. We got a request from a particular nation, I'm forgetting the details, saying that there was pollution at sea, and they wanted the IFC IOR's help. So the backtracking of most of the ships that transversed during that time period from that area was carried out. I think it was shortened down to 4 suspect ships, and finally the ship that actually did the marine pollution was identified. So it takes time. And as I said, the more the inputs, the more people you need, and therefore it has to be a 24/7 analysis ongoing. So if we really want to address the issue of maritime crime, again, it's a very tall shot, because the amount of vessels or the smallness, and I'm not even talking about submersibles that have not yet entered the region, which is there in that move from South America to North America. If those come in, then of course you're looking at even an underwater dimension. So it's a more complex picture, but there have been success stories that can be transposed onto addressing the situations that we are talking about.
Actually, a question for the Admiral, and then perhaps one for Pushpita. And my questions to you, sir, would be about the growing role of the Coast Guard. And, there's the sense that the Coast Guard budget has almost doubled in the past about a decade or so. They are now pretty much an ocean-going force. They're doing even foreign cooperation. There's Coast Guard ships going to Vietnam and Philippines and Oman and some other places. And so it's almost like a mini Navy now. But is there a danger that the more the Coast Guard involves itself in international activities, and there was a gazette, I think, in 2019 that has expanded their mandate somewhat to be present more in the maritime zones of India, which they were already doing, but apparently now they can implement any act of the government of India in those waters. So there is a sense in the Coast Guard also that we are growing, we are ambitious, we are a force that has a vision, and it's not to say that anyone resents the growth of the Coast Guard. It's a good thing. But is there a danger? I mean, I'm just sort of thinking out loud that as it grows on the other spectrum, on the right of the spectrum, to the left of the spectrum is the coast, and it is going to be drawn away from the coast. And it will somehow, the responsibility will devolve on the coastal police, which as it is isn't ready to tackle that challenge.
Difficult question, having been Director General of the Coast Guard. But I would be, I think what you wanted to say, you have said. There is a clear danger in the role of the Coast Guard becoming confused in this country. The Indian Coast Guard is not an armed force of the Union. It's an armed force just like the CRPF or the Railway Protection Force or any of 100 forces bear arms. It is a civilian force with civilian manning, with civilian rules, and it has been placed in the Ministry of Defense for good reason initially, because a new service needed the hand of the Navy to grow, to do basic stuff like maintenance. But as long as it remains in the MOD, there's a confusion of roles between the Navy and the Coast Guard. And like people have saying, we don't want two navies functioning within the MOD. So people have talked about it, but I think I will lend support now to the Coast Guard being shifted to the Ministry of Home Affairs. The United States Coast Guard has never been in the ministry in the US Department of Defense. It's been in the Department of the Treasury, because it used to be basically looking after smugglers. Then Department of Transportation, now in Department of Homeland Affairs. The Japanese Coast Guard functions at distances because there is no Japanese Navy. Anyway, cut a long story short, I think the Coast Guard itself and people outside are now getting confused as to what the Coast Guard is. The Coast Guard is not a military force. The Coast Guard is a law enforcement force, which also has to look after things like search and rescue, pollution control, environmental. It is not there to fight enemies and terrorists and to be a second Navy. This has come about again because of 2008 and confusion in the minds. And we do not want the Coast Guard it's a very dynamic professional service. It must develop its own ethos, its own culture, its own traditions, its own values. It doesn't have to be doing everything like the Navy does. But this will not happen so easily in this country, or any country. Once you set up a government organization, the most difficult thing is to change it or close it or do anything else. We can have a discussion on the Marine Police some other time. But the point now is that a law enforcement force is now showing the flag in the Philippines, and there is clear problem available in not only our minds, but in the minds of people abroad. One last thing on organization, and then I'll give up. These 16, 17 agencies which are involved in coastal security, fishing, ports, are present in all countries. And they fight in all countries. They don't see eye to eye with each other in all countries. They all believe that they are the superior force in all countries. The customs doesn't want to report to the port police. The port police doesn't want to report to the fisheries inspector. These things carry on. The only country which has got it right, and I have studied it around the world and visited some of them. If you have, this is for you, Prasanna, in one way. If you have coordination between staff, it can take you that far. But eventually there is a command issue, a command and control issue. So the people who've got it right are the French. In France, there are also 16, 17 agencies. And nobody wants to listen to the Navy or the Army or even the fisheries. No other agency wants to be placed under control of any agencies. And this is human and accepted. So what the French have done is they let everybody operate independently with coordination meetings, as we are doing now. But in a state where the defense or the security of the nation is being threatened, then by what we would call a gazette notification is issued by the President of France, and the Navy C&C of the Mediterranean or the Atlantic becomes the prefect maritime for that duration of time. And for that duration of time, he has command function over all 17 agencies, including fisheries. And why does it given to the Navy? Only because the Navy knows the maritime world better than everybody else who's in their small pockets. So what happens in France, and we put it up here, but there are humans, there are organizations. You must let these agencies operate independently with coordination, as we have started doing. But when there is an issue, when there is a threat, and there's a real problem, then you bring them all under a single command authority, whoever you can be. Because otherwise it does not function. Eventually in operations and actions at sea or anywhere else, there has to be a command function. Somebody who can order when there is no question of dissent. So that is something we have to work on, and we should work on it. So I have said, yeah, please, Ajay.
But I thought after 2008 there was a sort of organization we also put in place.
We didn't.
The overall.
No. It's not command function wise.
And the Coast Guard being the commander in chief.
I've been commander in chief, so I know exactly how it functions. So we don't have. No, the intent was before 2008. There was not even there was no terminology of coastal security, offshore security, full security. So this came into place when this was discussed immediately after 2000. Everybody realized from the Prime Minister down that there has to be a single point responsibility. So they put it on the Navy chief. The CNS was made a single point responsibility. The CNS went and said, I have the responsibility, but I don't have the authority. So then this CCS note came with the authority that the Navy will be overall in charge. But that is a statement. There is no command function.
That's true. No, in some of my conversations with Coast Guard officers, the sense that I got was that they were happy to work with the Navy, but they didn't see themselves as a subordinate force to the Navy.
But that's just the point. They are not a subordinate force. But till they remain in the Ministry of Defense, they'll always feel like a subordinate force. And that is why they need to go to an MH.
Now you make a good point. I have actually one question for Pushpita, and then I will encourage you to raise one or two more questions. And sir, I'll come to you after this. Let me just ask this question. Pushpita, I want to ask you: in country after country, in Asia at least, environmentalists complain that the maritime policy or the marine policy is basically to stop illegal incursions. It is not to sort of boost conservation or look at biodiversity preservation or look at, even pollution, etc. So it's a single-minded focus to just stop illegal entry into your waters. So what you've basically done is that you're performing a territorial function, meaning you think that these are my territorial waters. I can't have illegal incursion to these waters. And as long as you have that approach, you will be looking at coastal security through just one lens. Whereas coastal security is a lot else. For instance, fisheries policies. And they point out that the manner in which a number of countries in Asia, and I'm not going to single out India, but corporatizing fishing. The fisheries are already gone. There's been a decline in fish stocks, but we are just sending in these boats out there. And that, in a sense, also promotes these illegal fishing practices like bottom trawling, etc. A lot of that we see happen with Sri Lanka. They're fishermen, our fishermen, we all do bottom trawling, which is not okay. So in your field trips, did you ever get the sense that, the policy was more than just looking at, the terrorist attack that happened in Mumbai? Was it more than that? Or did you get the sense that everything that was being done was simply to stop the recurrence of another such incident in India's waters?
I think that was the case when I went for the field trips. Everybody was talking about the terrorist attacks. Everybody was talking that somehow illegal infiltration, all these things has to be stopped. But when I spoke to the fishermen, apart from the complaints they had that they are not given access to their traditional harbors, they are also talking about this marine pollution. And they are saying that because of this marine pollution and because of these, fishing, overfishing of overfishing, they are the ones of the stocks. They have to go beyond their areas, right? And many a times they do not have the means of doing so. So these kind of complaints were also, I heard about them, and they were saying, because of this port and because of all these industries coming along the coastline and all, it is, it is leading to lots of pollution of the coastal waters and all. So the complaint from the fishermen were there, but to what extent it has been taken into account by the government, I have no idea.
I'm K.K. Roy Chaudhary, environmental consultant. I think, sir, what you have been inquiring is about the environmental part of the marine sector. Our Ministry of Environment and Forests, Government of India's nicely charted out coastal regulation zone rules support that to be implemented by respective state authorities, coastal state authorities. So I'm inquiring about any coordination between this Coast Guard and their authorities and these state authorities taking care of the environmental part.
You make a good point, and this is something that one of us should have mentioned that actually with the CRZ regulations also, over the past decade at least, there is a sense that there's been some sort of dilution because there's a lot of construction now that is happening in those zones. And again, it comes back to the same point. The more you get the builders, you get infrastructure, creators, you get the tourism industry interested in the CRZ zones, the more there will be a dilution of these principles, and the more the environmental laws are given just the pass. So which is not good for conservation, for biodiversity preservation. But that again brings me to the point that I think our thinking has to a degree been colored by that incident that happened in Mumbai in 2008. And no matter how hard we try, we are simply just so focused on just preventing the recurrence of that attack. But you had a point, sir. Yes.
I think future economy is a blue economy, and we can explore a lot in addition to fishing. There are many options, mineral, metal, shrub, herbs. And second thing is tourism, the way Abhishek pointed out. Today we have seen that Ambani Sun, they are going for a cruise a huge business, and we are not exploiting this type of cruise business. So why this we being not taken seriously?
I agree with you, the blue economy is going to pick up, and it will require to be, it's another subset of the marine system, but it has little to do with marine security or coastal security. As it picks up, the issue of security will become even more larger as we get commercial enterprises in the blue zone, in the blue economy. But I think slowly and steadily in India, the use of the waters for commerce other than fishing, for sport like marinas, others is happening, for cruise liners who will come and pick up along the coast, coastal cruises and otherwise. It is happening slowly. Most Indians are not nautically minded, and the sea is a little far away for most people. But slowly interest is increasing, and so will the blue economy.
Actually, on the blue economy, so, I did a paper 2 years back on BE, and my finding was that there is a predicament when it comes to blue economy. A part of it has already been mentioned, which is that blue economy is about sustainable development. But the development part of it gets more importance than the sustainable part, which is exactly what the environmentalists complain about, which is say that if you think it's only about growth, you're mistaken. It's actually more about conservation. Once you conserve and then you develop the ecosystems, then you can also begin to harness some of those resources. But you have to be very slowly, sustainably. Unfortunately, I think in a number of countries, the impression is that blue economy is just about go and harness the resources from the sea, which I think is a bit defeating. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Pavan. I've got I would like to add further what has been discussed. The most important thing in Indian security or homeland security or internal security is the beat system, beat police system, which has been time-tested system, where in fact a lot of human intel comes from the beat system, which all the state police departments, they are having. And even going to an extent, Admiral Prasanna will in fact concur with me, that most of our security agencies or intel agencies also are in fact basing their human intel on this system only. So the importance has to be given to the, in fact, marine security force, which is being, which should be in fact kind of a armed force, just like in fact your CISF or CAPF. So that will in fact give a kind of a real-time intelligence input for the actionable intelligence to the Coast Guard or in fact other agencies for the enforcement of law in the seas and the coastal areas. That's my point.
Thank you. I think we are out of time. Is there anyone else that has a question? Yes, please.
Robert van Bruynesse, Netherlands Defense Attaché. I've got a question, observation. We talked about the demarcation between maritime security and defense and the role of classical Navy and Coast Guard. But at the same time, I see that the Navy and Coast Guard should work much more together in this world. When we're talking about gray zone operations, when we're talking about hybrid operations, some parts of the world you see seabed sabotage, pipelines, cables, that kind of things. That requires the Navy and the Coast Guard to work much more together. I don't say they need to integrate, because we still have the classical maritime policing and the classical tasks of the Coast Guard and the Navy. But how do you envisage that we have to work much closer together? It's not only happening in the Baltics, it's also happening in the South China Sea. And I see a need to cooperate much more.
That point is well taken. And I think in India, the Indian Navy and the Coast Guard do have a very good functioning relationship. And I think that relationship has improved over the past 10 years. But the real point that seems to have come out in this discussion is that coastal security is more than just about law enforcement. Law enforcement, the Navy and Coast Guard, along with perhaps the military police, we can do. But there's other areas also. Some of the areas that Pushpita mentioned about, conservation, etc. And that's beyond just policing. That's just beyond the policing role. So how do you develop a framework in which you can, comprehensively look at all of the issues? That is the real challenge for us. But with that, I think I'm going to bring this to a close. I'm going to thank our panelists for actually trying to unpack a very complex subject, which has many shades and dimensions to it. And I think they did a commendable job. So thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for, as I repeat myself, for braving the sun and the heat and being here. And thank you very much. I look forward to our next edition. And please join us the next time we do these national security conversations, because we actually learn a lot from all of your insights. So thanks once again. Can I ask you to put your hands together for our excellent panel?